Yeah. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very important panel session on sustainable agriculture. I'm Cristina Talaco. I'm the CEO of Coalition for Conservation. We are an environmental charity based in Australia, doing domestic and international work, bridging policy making with environmental credentials. And we're very glad to be here on Ag Day during COP to showcase the expertise that Australia has developed in terms of ag tech and sustainable agriculture. So I would like to invite our moderator for the day, because we've only got 45 minutes for this incredibly knowledgeable panel to discuss their ideas. And this is Senator Perrin Davey from Australia. The senator here is very well connected with rural communities, with the agricultural sector, and also has a lot of understanding on water management. She is the Shadow Minister for Water and Emergency Management in Australia. So it's without further ado, I'd like to invite Perrin to moderate the session.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thank you to the Coalition for Conservation for hosting this panel and getting the experts together. We've got a very exciting but time-limited session before us, 45 minutes. So we will try and be succinct, but to share our knowledge with you. Really appreciate it. So to set the scene for the session, I would like to introduce my Senate colleague, Senator Bridget McKenzie, Australia's first female agriculture minister. She has wide experience in the agricultural sector, policy development, policy making, and also working with international agencies to find solutions for our agriculture, which is so vitally important as we move forward to feed a growing world population with the challenges of climate change ahead of us. So, Bridget.
Hey. Coalition for Conservation is in the House. Well, thank you, C4C, for sponsoring us all at COP28. It's fabulous to be here, and particularly on Ag Day. Agriculture is one of our key industries in Australia. We export 80% of what we grow. We're very good at it, and we're helping feed the world. And we've got a lot of innovative solutions about how to continue to do that whilst addressing the challenges of climate change. I am a former agriculture minister, born into a farming family, and sustainable, prosperous and safe agricultural production is what I am all about, both personally, politically, but also I think as a patriot of our great agricultural producing nation. We've seen a rapid transformation of farming practice in Australia through the adoption of ag tech, the change of farming practice, both in cropping and livestock production, and that has led to a reality where we're able to lower emissions whilst also protecting yield and value. We're hoping to grow our agricultural industry to be a $100 billion industry by 2030, and we believe we can do that in a low emissions future. There is a famous poem in Australia that we are the land of droughts and flooding rains and also cyclones and bushfires, but her beauty and her terror, the wide brown land for me, evokes, I think, for those of us who care about agricultural production and farming families and farming communities, is that farmers were the first conservationists long before it was weaponised, the environment was weaponised for ideology. And I think at the moment we're seeing it even here at COP28, agriculture being pitted against effective action on climate change when actually they're not mutually exclusive constructs. We need to feed the world and we also need to lower emissions, and we can do that together. Our soils and our weather mean that how our primary production methodologies and systems can be applied to other places around the world. And that is why we are working so hard to share our science, share our knowledge, share our practice, not just to improve profitability at home on farm and as a nation, but to ensure that global food security becomes a reality because of the know-how of the Australian farmer. It's exactly what Australia is famous for. We are founders of an organisation called the Food and Agricultural Organisation, set up post-World War II to ensure that food security became a reality for the world. And we do that by backing science and evidence in practice. And it is critical, as I know we've got South Africa here in the House, that when I was over at the FAO, the African nations were saying we must continue to subscribe to science as a basis for designing agricultural production going forward. And now, thanks to Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, we're seeking to partner with African nations to share our knowledge, particularly with ag tech, for them to be able to grow safe, healthy and commercial qualities of agricultural produce well into the future of a low emissions future. Ag has to be part of the solution, and recently we've met with representatives from Zambia, which has a wealth of water resource which will allow them to obviously, and does allow them to produce renewable energy, but their agricultural production is not at a commercial scale. And so how can we in Australia assist a country like Zambia become the food bowl of Africa with all of that natural resource when we apply our know-how? And they're the types of partnerships that we're seeking to grow. In Australia, we have quite unique government responses. So our farmers pay levies to government, which then the taxpayer matches. We pool those levies so that there's quite a significant amount of money that goes into research and development, into cattle production, into horticulture products, into cropping systems, etc., right across the board of agricultural production. And that system has allowed critical research in the area of genomics, of water use, of precision ag, of ag techs, of how to use our water and soil better as well. And that's quite a unique system within the world of how to fund research. I just want to actually touch very, very briefly on those concerns I mentioned earlier about pitting agriculture and by default farmers and their regional communities against effective action on climate. The reality is the protein needs of the world are going to grow. Food security is now a dominant issue in so many of the developing world. But labelling the agricultural sector as, and I directly quote from a major newspaper at COP28, as a planet-destroying industry is not helping solve the problem, and doesn't address the reality that by saving the planet but simultaneously starving humanity of food is not going to be an equitable solution. Eliminating animal farming in particular, which is seen as the devil when it comes to climate action, unfortunately by some, is forcing Western climate solutions on developing countries, will be a new form of colonialism, and we need to get real about that. We need to share the gains that we, as more affluent nations, have been able to make through science, through its adoption on farm, to solve these challenges. And those global challenges are, labour shortage, changing consumer preferences, obviously climate issues, and we need to ensure that we've got the connectivity out in the regions. To actually ensure you can adopt agricultural technologies and precision agriculture, and that's something the Australian government's been very serious about doing in recent past. And one initiative I think that needs more focus is the use of soil and carbon sequestration in soil. In Australia, we use land-based practices to produce a lot of beef, and there's Macca's farms in New South Wales where they run 3,000 head of Angus and are essentially carbon neutral as a result of sequestering carbon in their pasture. So this whole talk around the place around livestock production being bad for the planet-destroying industry isn't true. And we need to be, I think, those of us that believe in a prosperous, sustainable agriculture sector and it's solving some of the issues of sustainability going forward in a low emissions future, need to be getting the research right, need to be promoting that in a much better way. I just Finally, wanted to commend everyone here today for being committed to a profitable agriculture sector. Australia is going to do its very best to share our know-how with the world, and you're going to hear from some experts today. I think COP28's been a very pragmatic COP where the reality of addressing climate change and lowering emissions to 2030 is smashing into the laws of economics, the laws of physics, and for us in agriculture, the laws of plant and animal biology. And I'm sure we can solve this conundrum. We're a very innovative species, so I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And if Bridget takes a seat. Now, I would like to invite the panel to come and join us on stage. Dr. Stuart Denman, Principal Microbial Biologist from the CSIRO, Laura Kramer from the International Livestock Research Institute, Tony Marr from the National Farmers Federation in Australia, and Emma Koth, the Managing Director of Rocket Seeder. I hope these, yes, they are turned on. Dr. Denman, I'd like to come to you first. Given what Bridget spoke about with the importance of research and development and the work you do, you work with the Meat and Livestock Australia. You're very involved in the research sector. How can research help us meet the climate challenges, especially when we don't want to demonise agriculture, we want to improve output? How can research help, and what policy settings do we need to make sure it can be done?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. And I think you're absolutely right. Look, livestock producers in Australia got a lot to be proud of. They're generally contributing to improving the sustainability and profitability of the livestock system. Many of the stock that are grazed in Australia are grazed on non-arable land. So that's land that doesn't compete with other sources of human edible protein. So it means we make very efficient livestock and animal products at no expense to other industries. But the Australian livestock system is very varied, and so our science has to also be varied to tackle that problem. So we've got intensive grazing systems in the southern part of Australia and our very extensive grazing systems in the north. So a lot of our research in Australia has been focusing on those solutions, and it generally falls into a couple of different camps. The first one being feed additives to either modify the rumen microbiome so it doesn't produce as much methane, or actual methane inhibitors, and we've heard quite a lot about those that are on the market. But we also look at forages and legumes. They're going to be a lot easier to deploy because they're just out in the landscape and the animals will eat them. But we're also looking at genetics. Can we develop a line of low methane but resilient and productive animals? And this needs to all be addressed together to get us to climate neutral system. But I also want to talk about, we keep hearing about things with some of these feed additives where we're getting like a 90% reduction in methane. But we need to put that in context. A lot of that is happening in the intensive systems, in feedlots. Now, the feedlots already produce 40 to 60% less methane than grazing animals. And in Australia, they're a very small proportion of our industry. And Australia's industry is really based in the north on those extensive grazing systems. But we only require about a 30% reduction in a grazing system to be equivalent to those reductions that people keep headlining in the feedlot industries. And that 30% also means that we're probably not pushing the animal to a situation where we're going into that productivity loss. Yes. Okay? And it's really important that any of these strategies are not a cost to the farmer. There's got to be productivity and profitability benefits to it. And so a lot of the research now is looking at, well, okay, if we can reduce methane, how can we capture that lost energy inside the animal and direct it into the animal for productivity? And so that's the exciting work that we're doing. But the most important thing is that a lot of these formulations are not actually optimised for the Australian grazing system. And so there's been a lot of concern that will they really work out there? And so work that we've been doing as part of a government-funded initiative, we've actually looked at can we formulate these to the grazing animals? And so what's really looking nice in the results is that those animals out there grazing and voluntarily going to where these supplements are and taking them are producing the same level of reductions of what we see under very controlled conditions. So it actually gives us a lot of hope. The problem for us is there is really a lack of supply of these feed additive supplements that inhibit methane. Globally, we're just not going to have enough to tackle the problem of livestock. So we really have to look at what are the short-term things that we can do while we wait for supply to ramp up. And I think we can go back to some very simple, basic animal husbandry stuff around improving nutrient supply to the animal, dealing with reproduction rates and calf loss so that every animal that is in the landscape is productive, so our methane intensities will go down in the short term. Now, I don't want to talk too much about policy, probably more around science policy. And what we're seeing is a lot of new products are appearing every week on the market claiming to reduce methane. And I think this is the comment that you made, Bridget, around we need science and evidence-based solutions. And so through the Global Research Alliance on Agriculture and Greenhouse Gases, they're actually about to publish technical guidelines that are being developed, at least from a science policy point of view, to look at how do we identify these new compounds, how do we know their mode of action, model the effects in the animal, how do we measure it, and how do we regulate that for carbon accounting. So I think from an international collaborative sort of point of view from all the scientists, we're coming up with ways that we want to see that these solutions are tackled. I think, the challenges still remain, but they're being addressed. There's new technologies constantly being developed, but I think the key thing is that we're working in partnership with farmers and producers. They're the ones that are going to know whether it's going to work on their properties. Okay.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned partnership, which is a great segue to bring in Laura. Your International Livestock Research Institute, and obviously the work that Stuart does in Australia helps feed in. But how does your organisation, and I understand you're based in Nairobi, and the work you're doing, what are the synergies and the differences between what we're doing, and how do we globalise the solutions?
Thank you so much. Yes, International Livestock Research Institute is headquartered both in Nairobi in Kenya and in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And we work really to improve lives through livestock. That's our goal. We work in Africa and in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And we're focused primarily on smallholder farmers, but pastoralists and other livestock keepers as well. And not just cattle, but also we work on poultry and pork and other types of animals. So, I think one of the things that I would build on from what you said in your opening remarks is that we agree that agriculture should not be demonized, but we also think that agriculture does need to change. We do need to transform our food systems because, like you said, the highly industrialized systems are having negative environmental effects. But where we can make gains, we should. And so I think one of the things that we really are trying to promote is that we need different solutions in different contexts. The context matters, and so we need to have tailored solutions. So while a lot of the work that you're doing in Australia can be beneficial to many parts of Africa, it needs to be tailored so that it can be not just copy and paste, but applied to the local conditions and made locally appropriate. And when we're working on transforming these livestock systems, we really need to make sure that the work is socially just and contributes to benefits for development. We don't want to just say no more livestock. We don't think that that's the solution, but really say, how can we improve livestock production so that people are improving their lives, having less harm to the environment, reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and benefiting from what they're doing as well, because, like you said, ultimately the farmer's profit is what will drive their decision making. And I think it's really great that we have some legislators here because we need the policymakers to get involved in this issue. We need the finance, we need the research, but we need the policy there as well to support it. So one of the things that we're really talking about is how livestock is so important in so many ways in low and middle income countries. You highlighted how important it is to Australia because it's such a big export. In Africa, it's such a big part of our nutrition and food security. And a lot of people are not eating enough meat or eggs or milk to meet their nutritional needs. And in the future, that demand is going to grow even more. So we need to be improving the production so that we're able to meet those needs. And we need to do it in a way that we can adapt to climate threats, because African livestock farmers are suffering heat stress, they're suffering reduced feed and forage availability, droughts, floods, increased diseases, lots and lots of pressures that need to be dealt with. And at the same time, we know that where a lot of African countries will be able to meet their nationally determined contributions is in the agriculture sector, and most of that is in the livestock sector. And so we need to be achieving all of these goals at once, which sounds like a difficult thing, but a lot of the interventions that are in the livestock sector will have these triple wins. So one of the things that we really are saying is that this multi-pronged approach is needed because the systems around Africa are so diverse. I think some of them are very similar to the grazing systems of Australia, but we also have mixed crop livestock farmers farming very small pieces of land with maybe 1 or 2 dairy cows, a few goats and sheep, and then their crops that they're recycling the manure from the animals to fertilize the crops, using the leftover crop residue to feed the animals. So they're very, they're cycling those nutrients already, but we can improve that even further. So what we are asking governments and our legislators and other partners to help us do is to focus on improving that productivity sustainably so that we can meet those growing food demands. So what we really need is funding to unlock the innovations that we're developing at ILRI with partners like CSIRO, and a lot of those are around breeds and feeds. So I'll just highlight 2 things that I think are success stories and that we can be doing more of. So on the breed side, ILRI implemented a project called Africa Dairy Genetic Gains Program. This was in Ethiopia and Tanzania. And this increased milk production by 50% since 2016, just by getting information from farmers on what their milk yields were, looking at how the increases in temperature was reducing that milk yield, and then finding the animals, the bulls, that were tolerant to those increases in heat. And then through finding the genome responsible for heat tolerance and breeding those animals, we were able to increase that milk production, get those that genetics out there and increase the milk production. And that really highlights the need to be conserving indigenous breeds, and because those genetics can be very useful in future. And I think that's something that Africa can share with the rest of the world, not just a one-way relationship, but also learning from each other and sharing with each other as well. And then around feeds, just better forages, making sure that animals have enough feed all year round can reduce methane emissions. A better fed animal will produce more product for less methane. And so through better forages, one of our other projects has found that if we can feed the animal better, we'll get up to 40% more milk from those animals during a lactation. And so those are easy wins. It's, you were mentioning feed additives. Feed additives for a lot of places in Africa are pie in the sky a little bit. But there are actions that we can take. It's low-hanging fruit, and we can take advantage of those and really improve the productivity for the farmer, for the people in the community, and reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. And then just getting also to the rangelands issue, pastoralism as a system and grazing, extensive grazing, is a really important production system across many parts of Africa. And so there are 2 activities that we are also working on within ILRI that are working in this system. One is participatory rangeland management. So by bringing the communities together and agreeing on how to utilize the land, reseed the pasture, improve the grazing management, do some tree planting to provide shade during those really hot days because animals need the shade so that they're not under heat stress. we're able to also conserve water. And within the communities where we've been doing this participatory rangeland management, women in leadership has also increased, which has been a really nice outcome as well. And then one final thing that I'll finish on is the index-based livestock insurance work, IBLI, that we've been doing. So we've been working with the Kenyan government and the Ethiopian government to develop an insurance product that for those pastoralists that are covered by it, when rainfall is low and forage availability falls below a certain level, as measured by satellites, it automatically triggers a payment that the pastoralist can then use to either move their animals, to bring in feed, or to send their children to school. You know, the income that they normally would have gotten from those animals gets replaced by the insurance payout. So those are some nice examples, and we hope to continue our work with CSIRO and others. And I'm also eager to hear from the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting work there. Tony, coming to you, you're CEO of the National Farmers Federation, an advocacy group that works with farmers in Australia, but also it's really important that you have international relationships as well. Can you talk us through the linkage between the NFF, the researchers, and the global relationships you have?
Sure, thanks, Perrin. We definitely are an advocacy group. We try and come up with policy that is based on evidence and science to advocate to of course, our government, but increasingly what we're seeing, and there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that we're an export-orientated industry. We export or produce 3 times as much food and fibre as we need in Australia. So we're a small population, large country. So those global collaborations, those global partnerships are increasingly important, particularly as we see sort of geopolitical dynamics across the globe. The relationships that Australian farmers have and that Australian governments have to export, enable exports of food and fibre are critically important. The other thing that we're really focusing on, and we've been doing here at COP and previous COPs, is to build alliances with other farm groups. So whether they're in Africa, whether in South America, in Europe, in North America, farmers are facing the same issues around the globe, and they're increasingly worried. What is becoming increasingly apparent to us is that there's a real need for farmers to come together, to advocate, to share their experiences, which are very similar. Yes, they might be on different scales and there might be different sort of dynamics in different countries, but farmers are all facing the same problems. And particularly with food security, one of the real challenges is farmers feel like they're being traded off, and agriculture is seen to be, the worst performer or the troubling child, when in fact we've done a lot of good work. We've got some more work to do for sure, but we have to pursue some of these policies not in isolation. We have to actually get the right balance between food security, climate resilience and climate security and energy security. And farmers that we've spoken to in the last couple of days, but over the last few years, really need agriculture and farmers to be part of the solution and part of the conversation. So that's what we're here at COP. That's why we advocate globally, and we're building really strong relationships with the farming groups around the world.
Fantastic. And we have great farmers in Australia. There are great farmers around the world. One thing, farmers are good at producing. They're not necessarily great at marketing and selling themselves. Emma, Rocket Seeder, can you explain where you come into it and how you help farmers and industry to actually make that link?
Yeah, sure. So Rocket Seeder is a not-for-profit based in Melbourne in Australia. We've been around for about 7 years. So we support researchers and entrepreneurs to help them understand the commercialisation process, essentially, so they can better, commercialise and get products to market or technology to market that otherwise would sit on the shelf. And we do have a bit of an issue in Australia in particular, and I think other countries in the world, about we do some great research, but often it doesn't see the light of day, or it doesn't get to have as much impact as it could have in Australia or elsewhere. So that's what we're trying to do, is support researchers from universities and state governments in the agri-food sector, but also one of the things that we're trying really hard to do is find STEM researchers so that aren't familiar with the agriculture sector, and bring them into the sector so we can have more of an impact. So whether that's, researchers in robotics or, AI or whatever, there's all, as most of the people know here, agriculture is a very, very big, complex sector, and which is exciting, but there's a lot of different types of science and technology that we can sort of utilise, and we do utilise in the sector. So that's what we try to find. We're sort of, sieving through universities and, LinkedIn and so forth, and doing our best to sort of attract people into the sector and into our programs. And we run our programs with entrepreneurs and researchers together because we think that they can learn from each other. Often a researcher, and I used to work for the Victorian government in agriculture. I'm not a scientist myself, I'm not a researcher. Well, I am actually a different type of researcher in business. But it's really, I guess, sometimes it takes a bit of coaxing to encourage people to, I guess, look at commercialising, or at least understanding what the commercialisation process is, to help them to, get that, the technology out to the market so it has impact beyond, their state or the region or wherever they're working, so that they can hand it over somehow to someone else to do the hard work, and they can continue to research. And sometimes it's the entrepreneurs that do our program that are really passionate about solving a particular problem, but they don't actually have the technology to do that. So, it's a matter of, I guess 2 minds together is better than one, and that's what we do. Another thing that we're doing is we're running, just about to launch early next year, a national food waste challenge with End Food Waste Australia. And so basically the reason why we're doing that is we want to find as many solutions to food loss and food waste problems across Australia, and sometimes it's not obvious that even, this sounds a bit funny, but that somebody with a technology that is running a business is preventing food waste and food loss. Maybe it's not the key. I'm seeing somebody, a startup over there, acknowledge that, but I think, sometimes you have to sort of say, well, this is really important. We've got a national goal, we've got a global goal of halving food loss and food waste by 2030, and we're nowhere near that. We need as much help as we can. So your technology, you might have developed to do something else, but we think that if you sort of, focus more on this, then you will have more impact. So we're all about impact at the end of the day, and bringing people together, joining dots. We would like to be, have everyone more aligned on SDGs, but, there's a lot of work to do before we get there in Australia. But that's part of the reason why I'm here.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Before I get the chair of Coalition for Conservation up to close the session, just quickly, I'm going to work backwards. There's a whole group of people in the plenary session working out what the communique is going to say. What one sentence would you like to see in that communique? From your perspective?
I think support the encouragement of people coming together, just like Tony was saying, farmers to come together from different countries, from different parts of Australia, because, in terms of innovation, there'll be a better outcome and better impact when people, people's minds come together.
I would say recognise and prioritise the role of farmers in food security.
Laura?
Yeah, I think I'd pick up on that as well, but, you know, provide the means of implementation, by which we mean funding, for that to happen as well. So we need agriculture to be part of the negotiations, and we need funding to back up that climate action in agriculture.
Yeah, I think it's quite simple. You know, just support sustainable livestock production. It's critical for food security and it's critical for livelihoods.
Access to food at a global, national and regional level is a UN human right. And if we're having these types of global conversations, it is crazy for agriculture to not be part of that communique going out of COP28.
Couldn't agree more. It's so important, and we need protein, we need good pastures, we need good crops, we need strong agriculture, and we need strong relationships around the globe. And that's why the work all of you are doing is so vitally important. And I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank you all for being on the panel. I invite you to stay here while I'm just going to call the Chair of Coalition for Conservation, former Minister, the Honourable Larry Anthony, to come and make a few closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Perrin. Look, before I thank our speakers, I'd just like to acknowledge our African contingency here, and particularly those from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Zambia, and I think we head further north to Rwanda, and also I think we've got in the audience Mohammed Fahey from Egypt. Great to have our friend here. And Tanzania. Anyone else I missed out on? One of the reasons why we're having this forum that's being organised is because we were actually C4C, Coalition for Conservation, sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And part of that sponsorship was to say to us, Australia, look, can you share your knowledge, your innovation, your wisdom, particularly with Africa and our closer neighbours in the Pacific. And I think when you look at Africa, I mean, maybe last century was the European history, perhaps the first half of this century is Asia, but we definitely know the second half of this century and next century is Africa. I suppose, Laura, as you mentioned, the work that you're doing at Nairobi, and of course all the input, particularly that we had from yourself, Stuart, from CSIRO, and how we can improve livestock production and try to reduce methane. I think some of the comments, Tony, that you mentioned as well here today is well, what can we do as farmers globally? And I know it's very different from those in developing nations, third world nations, to those in first world nations, but the common theme, of course, is food security. Again, Emma, I think what you're doing, of course, was trying to encourage startup capital and innovation, and of course the whole idea, particularly in first world countries, is not to diminish waste. You know, so here we've got excess waste, and of course we haven't got enough food in other parts of the world. I'd also like to thank Perrin and Bridget, and both these ladies, particularly Perrin, comes from a rural background. Also, of course, our Senator from Victoria, Bridget, has been a former Minister for Agriculture in Australia and very passionate. So on behalf of all of us, and particularly our MPs from Australia, can I thank our panel members, and can we put our hands together and give them a warm round of applause? And I think we need a photo as well, so perhaps some of our friends from Africa might want to come up to the stage as well.